Hello all and welcome, and I am the mgtowphilosopher. And in today's video, I would like to talk about what it means to be a man. Now, this might seem like a silly subject to some of you. After all, most of you listening are men and are saying to yourselves, "But mgtowphilosopher, I know what it means to be a man. I'm a man." First off, let me just say that, of course, you're all men in the technical sense of the term. You have the right parts, hence technically you are men. And some of you are actually real men. But some of you, unfortunately, are not. Now, the reasons for this are varied. Having been raised by a single mom, having no male role models throughout your lives, being educated out of being a man by a system that not only doesn't value male traits, but hates them, by women who treat boys like defective women who need to be changed, then complain when they can't find real men, by a media that displays men as morons and makes it okay to make men and anything masculine into a running joke, by a government that prioritizes women many times over men and marginalizes men. The list just goes on and on. Now, there are many reasons why some of you are not real men. It's a shame, and it really isn't even your fault. But if you're a young man in your 20s and early 30s, you really didn't have a chance. For you see, male hatred has seeped into every pore of the Western world with the sole purpose of feminizing men, so as to make them more able to be controlled. However, the consequences for doing this are dire. The destruction of the world, for example, as it's male traits and not female ones that hold the world together. Because now, instead of having real men to maintain and continue to build the world, we have man-woman hybrids running around who are in touch with their feelings. Man-woman hybrids who are not afraid to express how they feel, who are not afraid to cry on cue, who are not afraid to express the belief that they are evil and should feel man guilt and castigate all men, including themselves. Men who embrace self-hate and self-loathing and who hate all male traits, instead embracing female traits, including valuing subjective reality over objective truth, weakness over stoicism, feminism and man-hating over masculinity, equality of outcome over competition and merit-based advancement, survival and advancement of everyone over survival of the fittest in all situations. And the situation is dire, people, and at this pace, the Western world only has a few more decades of life left in it. That being the case, what can those of us who have learned what it means to be men do to make sure that these lessons, those lessons required to be an actual man, don't end up dying off entirely? Well, we can teach those lessons to others so that many of the younger men out there learn what it means to be a man. I mean, hell, if their mothers in the state deprive them of fathers, or they have fathers who are essentially emasculated by the system and are nothing more than man-woman hybrids, then it's up to guys like myself who can articulate a message with reasonable clarity to help get the message across to young guys out there in regards to what it means to be a man. Now, first off, this is in no way self-serving of me, nor am I saying I'm better than any of you younger guys out there. No. I'm just different than some of you in that I had the advantage of being raised in a different time, by different parents. A time when men still had value and were treated with as if they had value. A time when the educational system wasn't so utterly corrupted and 100% pro-female and anti-male. A time when the media didn't portray all men as fools and worthy of only derision. It was a different time that I grew up, the late 60s and early 70s. They were nothing like the mid-80s and certainly far removed from the 90s. And the West is so different now that you wouldn't even recognize Western countries if you looked back 40 or 50 years and compared them to today's Western countries and how they are now. So no, I'm no better, just different. And I'd like you young guys out there to be different too, because it's those differences that make you men, and not some eunuch he-she who doesn't know what being a man even means. Now, first off, let me just say that I don't believe it's a man's job to sacrifice himself for others, nor do I believe that that is what makes a man, like so many trad cons like to say. That's very old world thinking that needs to go by the wayside. And even if things were to change tomorrow and women were to fully embrace their gender roles again, I still don't think I'd be willing to go back to the old way of doing things. However, as that's not likely to happen anyway, it's a moot point. No. What I'm going to discuss in this video are the aspects of the mind and behavior which concern being a man. Because physically, if you have junk between your legs, you're a man, and that's not something that can be altered simply through indoctrination. However, the mind and the resultant behavior, now those things can be altered. So that's what I shall concern myself with in this video. Now, let me start off by talking about feelings. Men have them. We have them just like women do, and despite what everyone wants you to believe, we have the same amount of emotion as women do. The difference is that men control their emotions better. Well, they used to, as they used to be taught how to do so by their fathers and by other men, which now just isn't the case. So let me just say this. When it comes to controlling their emotions, men are more capable, but nowadays they act more like women than men. Of course, they are still less emotional than women in that their brains are different, and that makes them naturally less susceptible to emotional outbursts. Still, being naturally less inclined to act out emotionally, that's a far cry from how men used to be. Now, you might be tempted to ask, but mgtowphilosopher, what's the big deal? Why is it important to control your emotions? Don't women have it right when they say men are damaging themselves and not being true to who they are when they sublimate, hide, or don't express their emotions? Isn't it better if they let their feelings out and embrace them? No, they're not better off. You might be better off, as anyone who would ask such a question is likely a woman or a feminized weakling man-woman hybrid. I feel guilty. I feel sad. I feel pity for that guy in my office who didn't make it for whatever reason. I feel bad for black people, but not for Asians, even though they're a tiny minority and should be doing poorly, but they actually do better academically and make more money than everyone, including whites. Not sure how that works since they're a minority. I can't figure that one out, as that doesn't fit into my ideology, and I'm not using logic and reason anymore. Subjectivity and emotion are so much better than logic and reason. Guess that's just a blip that I'll have to use cognitive dissonance to ignore. I also feel bad for women. Life just isn't fair. The system is rigged. The system is biased. I need to protest more. I need to protest these horrors. I need to make a difference. I want all these other people to have the same opportunities as me, even though I really only care about everyone having the same outcome. Yeah, yada, yada, yada. Letting your emotions control you instead of vice versa leads to this kind of irrationality, distraction, contrary thinking, and eventually delusion. So much so that you not only lose sight of the ball, but you also lose sight of what's real. Instead, becoming suspended in some ether of subjective nonsense, and of course, lacking grounding in what used to be called common sense, you become a tool for whoever is best at manipulating your emotions. This is part of why I teach people to avoid ideologies to begin with. By the way, gentlemen, men of a century ago, they weren't Vulcans. Far from it. Many a drunk, deadbeat guy would beat his wife and kids, and that still happens to this day. Same goes for women, obviously. However, men understood the need to control their emotions because if they didn't, they couldn't be very productive in society. You know, feelings might be good for making art, but they suck for any endeavors that are productive. That's part of why men have evolved to be more logical and reasonable as a gender in the first place, because such skills favor productivity and survival. Those are things that were bred into us via evolution. Hence, it does not serve us to be overly emotional. It might have served women when they were actually women and not some weird hybrid creature trying to be men. However, embracing emotion doesn't serve us or play to our strengths. It makes us less than a man, less than we could be. So, control your emotions. Don't let them control you. This is key to being a man. It's not about sublimation, as so many lefty feminists have said in an attempt to brand certain male traits as negative. Traits, by the way, that enable us to be more powerful in the world. No. It's about control and the ability to control your emotions, which, by the way, gives you great power, something the left knows. And that's mainly why men have been taught the exact opposite as the norm. Accept and embrace your emotions. Don't hide or sublimate them, because that's bad. Wrong. It's not sublimation to control your emotions. It's simply about embracing and using logic and reason to inform and guide your decisions and actions. Doing this is a large part of what gave men of the past so much power in the world. And it's also a large part of why we no longer have very much power today. Learning to embrace logic and reason is part of what you need to do if you want to be a real man. Logic and reason over feelings. Objective reality over subjective reality. Number 2, life is hard. Get over it. You're not always going to get what you want. You can't. So deal with it. You can't always do what you want and be able to make a living at it. You can't always do what you want, period. In fact, you rarely get what you want. Sometimes you never get what you want. Sometimes you have to work an ungodly number of hours just to get ahead. And sometimes you work an ungodly number of hours and never get ahead, whilst other people seem to whiz by you doing less work. That's life. It's not fair. It's not easy. It's hard. And unfair, to boot. You have to accept these things if you want to be successful in life. Otherwise, you'll just end up railing against your fate and label it as somehow wrong and unfair instead of accepting it and doing your best with what you've been given. You see, a real man does his best. He makes no excuse. He plays with the cards he's been dealt. A pussy boy, on the other hand, complains and makes excuses. Listen, until you learn to accept the hardships life is going to send your way and make lemons into lemonade, you'll never be able to call yourself a man. No, that doesn't mean that you just accept your lot in life and do nothing. You work your hardest, you do your best within the framework of what you have available to you, and you strive to have more things available to you. It just means you work as hard as you can and recognize that you don't have total control over everything, and you may never get all the things you want. That's life. Think deeply on this one. Number 3, life is pain. Pain is life. This is a lesson I learned very early on, that pain is an integral part of life. You can't escape it. It crops up every day and takes tiny forms and big forms. How you deal with it has a lot to do with how much you've come to terms with the fact that life is pain. To what extent have you come to terms with this reality instead of trying to fight it or seeing that pain as somehow unfair or undeserved says a lot about you. You know, if you've come to believe that it's your right to be comfortable, to be fed and clothed and warm in winter and cool in summer, to never have to hear a word that pains you, then you're not a man. If words seem to you as if they're actual physical harm, then you are weak and definitely not a man. You know, the modern day obsession with hate speech and trigger warnings is a perfect example of the kind of weakness I'm talking about. Or how about the expectation that health care be provided for you, that food be provided for you, that everything be provided for you, that you don't have to suffer any pain or hardship? Yeah, that's a complete and utter denial of the hardships that come with being alive, and an attempt to flee from any and all pains that come with said hardship. Life is pain. You have no right or privilege not to experience it. Yeah, you can take steps to minimize the possibility of experiencing pain, of course. After all, you do have some control, but not total control. After all, anyone could get cancer at any time. A bus could hop a curve and throw you 50 feet. It may not kill you, but that's some massive pain. And you have no control over these types of things. They just happen. Yeah, you should do everything in your power to avoid injuries, be as careful as possible. Duh. But shit happens sometimes. And I can tell you, by the way, I can tell you the physical pain, it often pales in comparison to the pains of the mind and the so-called spirit or heart, which seem to be the pains that people want to run away from the most, because those are the ones that cause people the most pain, the most suffering. That said, pain of the mind, it's a creation of the mind, and we choose how much it harms us. You know, people who complain about pain, who complain about words that cause pain, and how those words are equal to fists, well, they're fools. And men who do this are not men. They are boys who've been raised to favor feelings over facts and reality. Such a boy will have the maximum amount of pain when exposed to the minimal amount of hardship, as they are totally immersed in their own subjective reality. Just like a woman would be. Sadly, these are people who've never had any real hardship in their lives and are seeking to create their own suffering so they can see and present themselves to the world as victims. Yeah, having victimhood status, it's the hip new trend. You ain't hip if you ain't a victim of some kind and haven't suffered some kind of indignity. Hence, suffering offense, feeling pain from words, that's the new normal. Used to be sticks and stones could break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Now you have people who've never had a broken bone in their lives complaining about what victims they are because of quote-unquote hate speech and then going out to beat up very real people because these snowflakes equate words with physical violence. Listen up, people. You better wake up and smell the coffee. Because unless you embrace the pains of life instead of trying to hide from them behind trigger warnings and safe spaces, life will be forever putting up insurmountable roadblocks that you'll never be able to climb over because of the very real pain that will be involved in having to do so. And it'll just be too much for you. What with your perception of near impossible pain being when someone says a mean word to you. Now, to someone who recognizes that life is pain and who has learned to tolerate it, learn to tolerate real pain, and who can ignore it to a certain extent, well, that person is going to be successful. In contrast, the self-induced pain of a weakling who is viewing the world through a subjective lens and feels that he has the right to feel no pain at all, well, that person, they're going to be a loser. Listen up, people. Life is pain. It's a daily reminder that you are alive. If I can feel pain, then I'm still here. And life is great. Life is pain. It's a daily mantra for me, and I never forget it. Now, of course, a man isn't just his mental makeup. There's also how he acts in the real world. So what actions, what qualities must the man embrace that typify a man? Well, first off, a man should always keep his promises. Honor his word. This, to me, is one of the most important qualities that defines a man as a man. Keeping your word. Never make a promise you can't keep. Be aware of your limitations and abilities so that you never, ever say you'll do a thing that doesn't end up getting done. Simple. Next, honesty. Now, this one isn't set in stone because sometimes telling the truth isn't the right thing to do. I'm not one of those people that believes in absolutism when talking about certain things. I think many a situation has extenuating circumstances, so you must judge each situation individually. Of course, be honest whenever you can. The times you cannot, well, I'll leave that up to you to decide. I mean, again, there is such a thing as excessive honesty or brutal honesty or being too abrasive. Use common sense, if you possess it, that is. And I hope after this video you will strive to do so. Next, honor. Be honorable. Part of being honorable is about being honest. Part of it's about keeping your word. Part of it's about how you feel about yourself. Now, honor can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I think it's important for a man to have some kind of code of honor. For example, not asking more than what's a fair price for what you're selling, even though you think you can get it. Or having a car you've kept in relatively good condition that you feel should get more than the current Blue Book value, so you're considering dialing back the odometer to represent the car as having less miles than it actually does, thus allowing you to ask more money. These kind of actions are the type that you can likely get away with and no one will ever know. Except you. You will know. So you see, a personal code of honor, it's very important if you want to have a sense of dignity and self-respect. So be honorable in your dealings with others. It'll benefit you in the long run. And in the end, you have to live with yourself. Next, loyalty. Yes, be loyal to those who deserve and have earned it, no matter what. Even if that person is unpopular and you end up catching flack for being friends with them. Even then, don't yield to such pressure. Whether it be social justice warrior nonsense and you're an adult in the workplace, or you're a young adult in university, or a teenager dealing with peer pressure. Always be loyal to those who deserve it. You know, loyalty is important when it's earned, and it does have to be earned. It's not given. And those who earn it, they deserve it, and it should never be lost or thrown away because of fear of what other people might think or do. Only those people who have earned your loyalty can release you from that obligation. By the way, there are limits, of course, to what loyalty buys you, such as being asked to do something criminal. Use common sense, obviously. Next, owning your mistakes. Now, it's important as a man to take responsibility for your actions, whether or not others will let you get away with things, let things slide, not call you on your actions. This doesn't absolve you of bad actions. Because again, there's always one person who in the end you'll have to face in this world, and that's you. If you make mistakes, take responsibility for them and own up to them if called on them. That's simple. Even if you aren't called out on them, you should call yourself out. Recognizing your mistakes is the quickest way to avoid making them again. If you find it hard, even impossible, to take responsibility for your mistakes, then the consequences can be very dire for you. For you will never learn from them, and you'll continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Look, if you want to be happy, if you want to be a productive person, it's best to see your own mistakes and learn from them. We all make them. What's important is what you do after you make them. Also, some people make far fewer mistakes than others. And it's those people who are the ones who very early on recognized how important it was to see and learn from their own mistakes. Those people are generally very successful, by the way. Taking responsibility and ownership of your mistakes isn't simply about being a man either. It's about improving yourself, as a person learns more from their own mistakes than they ever will from their successes. But only if they acknowledge and accept responsibility for them. Remember that. Don't let pride and ego hinder you from becoming a man of real substance and integrity. And by the way, a wise man will also seek to learn from the mistakes of others. He won't let pride or ego deter him from asking questions and learning from those who have been where he hasn't. If you want to be a better man, it isn't enough to just learn from your own mistakes. History and the written word exist for a reason, not to mention other men. Don't be fearful to engage and learn all you can about the mistakes of others. Better to learn from their mistakes than to have to learn from your own. Next, don't do anything half-assed. You know, a man is judged by his actions, or at least he should be. That being the case, if a man decides to do something, he needs to do his best. Always put 100% in everything you do and never cut corners. In this way, you'll be able to take pride in what you do. Knowing that you do a good job and having that pride, it leads to confidence and self-esteem. Next, master at least one thing in life. Now, this might sound odd, maybe because you've never heard it before, but it's an important one. For you see, the way to master one thing is the way to master all things. The discipline you're seeking to master might change, but the way of mastering it will always be the same. And if you learn how to master one thing, then you know the way to master all things. Such a skill is not one to be underestimated, as it'll lead to having the ability to become good at whatever you choose to pursue in life. This understanding is very important for a man, as his work and his career should be part of who he is. No matter what he does, be it digging ditches or building skyscrapers, a man who can master anything if he so chooses will reach the highest level of ability possible for himself in whatever profession he chooses. Next, respect yourself. Don't treat yourself with contempt or neglect. Be aware of those things you do which are not good for you and indulge in them only occasionally. Yeah, okay, we all have our little vices, and there's nothing wrong with those. Just be aware of the consequences of them and willing to accept those consequences. Also, be aware that self-respect is important. And if you don't respect yourself, how likely is it that other people will? Keep this in mind. Next, patience and tolerance. You hear these words often enough these days, especially the word tolerance. You also tend to hear that a good man, a real man, should be patient. However, that's a loaded statement because it misrepresents patience as a good thing in all situations, and it doesn't even speak at all to tolerance. That's because tolerance and patience, well, they're two different things. But of course, you wouldn't know it, what with the way the left has redefined words. Now most people see patience and tolerance as absolute goods. Yeah, context doesn't matter. No, context isn't important. Tolerance is always good no matter what. Of course, the reason for this is the same reason for why patience is always good, and real men should always be patient, right? So that you will have patience for the crap and tolerate the nonsense of the left. Yes, tolerate stupid opinions. Yes, tolerate stupid ideas. After all, reality is relative. You could be wrong even though you're right, and I could be right even though I'm wrong. Objective reality just doesn't exist. Everything is relative, everything is subjective, yada, yada, yada. And of course, we should respect and tolerate that which we find objectionable, because if we don't, then we're not good men or good human beings. Meanwhile, those who are on the left and who are saying this stuff, well, they refuse to tolerate the views of others if those views don't fall within their own ideology. And yet, tolerance is always a good thing? Really? No thanks. You know, a real man, he objects when he sees something objectionable. He doesn't tolerate it. Well, maybe from kids to a certain extent. Maybe then he'll tolerate some nonsense, because kids, well, they can be cute and their nonsense is often just kids being kids and of no harm. But what about the nonsense of grown-ups? That kind of nonsense can be very harmful to a lot of people. Do you stand up and object then? What about lies and disinformation? Do you just sit back and say nothing then as well, even though you know it's bullshit that shouldn't be tolerated? And do you do so just so that your life will be easier and uncomplicated by people who are really intolerant to those who disagree with them, like bricks and bats intolerant? If so, then shame on you. For a man stands up to injustice and bullshit. He doesn't tolerate it, nor does he have patience when confronted with that which is unacceptable. Now, sure, I'll have patience when I'm, say, waiting to see a doctor. However, if my appointment is at 5 o'clock and I'm supposed to wait until 8 o'clock, well, that's unacceptable, and I won't tolerate that. I'll simply go and find a new doctor, and he'll lose my business. And if I see a man or anybody being attacked for no reason, I'll help them, even if it means I might get attacked, because that's what men do. And if more men acted like that, we wouldn't have nearly as many problems as we do now. For you see, the West is collapsing, and it's been taken over by fools who think a socialist regime will result in a utopia for everyone. Even after 100 million people and more have been killed by such systems in the past 100 years. Then you have low IQ morons who focus on 160 deaths by mass shooters in the United States in the past 100 years, when socialism has killed 100 million in the same period of time, and governments the world over in the past 100 or so years have killed 200 million people. Talk about massive problems. Insanity is more like it. And all because of patience and tolerance for nonsense. Well, I refuse to tolerate any of it anymore. How about you? As I said at the start, a lot of this is not a man's fault. Men these days have been indoctrinated for the past 3 to 4 generations to believe this garbage. That said, there comes a time when you really do need to start thinking for yourself. Because there's just too many resources out there and too much information to excuse the ignorance and indoctrination that so many men continue to buy into. Indoctrination which makes them into half men, half women, who are both, yet neither. Which brings me to my final point. Men do not have a feminine side. There's no yin and yang in terms of sex. That is just hippy-dippy BS spread by the left to get men to accept something that's a lie. That they have a feminine side and should embrace it. I mean, hell, you don't hear feminists telling women to embrace their masculine side, do you? Of course not, because they don't have one. I mean, yeah, they can pretend and try to be men, but they make crappy men, and for good reason. The same goes for men. We make crappy women, for good reason. We don't have some little woman piece in us that we need to embrace. We have masculinity, something which feminists consider toxic, which is why you never hear them talking about a masculine side in women. And by the way, that alone should tell you all that you need to know about that feminine side in men bullshit. It's nonsense. Now, I'm not saying you must be an unfeeling monster to be a man. No. What I'm saying is that you need to use your emotions as a tool and nothing more. It's your logic and reason that should inform and guide you in regards to how you act, not your emotions. And a real man is a man who's not afraid of his emotions. He simply doesn't live by them. He uses them. They don't use him. A real man, understands that life is hard and that it's often unfair, and he accepts that. He doesn't rail against reality trying to change it. I mean, yeah, there may be some things that are done by men that are unfair, but it's up to him to decide if those are things that are just a part of life in general or something that he needs to work to change. A real man understands that life is pain with small bits of pleasure sprinkled throughout. He also understands that it's experiencing that pain that defines him as a man. He doesn't run away from it or try to hide from it. He doesn't try to pass laws to shut down other people's so-called hurtful words. No, a man doesn't fear feeling pain, so he doesn't live his life in fear. In turn, a man, when he becomes a man and lives as a man, will know what real pain is, and that words are nothing but hot air. They can't hurt him unless he chooses to let them. A real man will work hard for his own betterment, and he'll always take responsibility for his actions. He'll never do anything half-ass. He'll always keep his word, and he'll always be loyal to those who have earned it, even if it causes him harm. He won't tolerate evil when he sees it, and he'll have no patience or tolerance for that which shouldn't be tolerated. A real man is honorable, and he lives by a certain code, a code that states what is and is not acceptable. And all men should sit down and think deeply about what their code should be. And once they've figured that out, they need to live their life by that, using logic and reason as their guides. And as a man, he's likely to never be hailed as the hero he is for adhering to a code and being a real man his entire life. But that's okay, because a real man is unconcerned with kudos from others. He lives his life and he dies, in most cases without a hurrah from anyone. However, if he lived a principled life, adhering to what he knew to be right and wrong based on logic and reason and not emotion, always doing what was right and standing up when he saw something wrong, then he's a hero regardless of whether or not he was hailed as one by others. In closing, and to succinctly summarize it, these are the things you need to be a man, a real man. Reason, accountability, self-control, meaning controlling one's emotions and in turn one's actions. Honesty, especially with oneself. Honor and integrity. Stoicism. Intolerance for evil. Patience when it's required. A critical mind. Acceptance of the hardships in life instead of denial. Self-respect. Self-awareness, which comes with time and application of all the prior attributes I have spoken of being practiced on a daily basis. Rejection of dogma and ideology, meaning thinking for oneself, especially rejection of feminism in all its many forms. Now, many of you listening, especially those of you who are older, will understand most, if not all, of what I've said here. To those of you who are young and still struggling to discover your place in this world, well, this is how you do it. This is how you find it. By consciously choosing who you will be, and through action and self-awareness, implementing these things I've spoken of into your daily life. And on a daily basis, practicing them mindfully until they become a part of who you are. You must first be mindful until mindlessness is the end result. And then, there you are. I am the MGTOW philosopher, and I wish you a good day. Take care.